August 19, 1944, near Chambois, France. The valley lay under a haze of smoke and dust. Burned-out trucks smoldered along narrow Norman roads. Horses, once harnessed artillery wagons, lay motionless beside shattered wheels. The air carried the smell of fuel, cordite, and late summer wheat crushed beneath tank tracks. German columns stretched for miles. Infantry without vehicles. Panzer crews without fuel. Staff officers without communications. They moved east in desperate fragments, hoping the corridor ahead remained open. Above them, Allied aircraft circled methodically. When engines roared downward, the road erupted again in flame and panic. Field became graveyards of steel. Convoys dissolved into wreckage within minutes. To the north, Polish armor tightened its grip on the heights of Mont Ormel. To the south, American units pressed forward from Argenton. The gap between them narrowed by the hour. Inside this tightening pocket stood nearly 90,000 German troops, survivors of weeks of brutal fighting in Normandy. Many had crossed half of Europe in earlier victories. Now they stood surrounded. The collapse unfolding here was not sudden. It had been building since the first Allied soldiers stepped onto the beaches of Normandy in June. And it began long before the smoke rose over Falaise. June 6, 1944, before dawn, the English Channel was thick with ships. Over 5,000 vessels moved toward the coast of Normandy. On the beaches of Utah, Omaha, Gold, Juno, and Sword, Allied soldiers prepared to land against the German Atlantic Wall. By nightfall, nearly 156,000 troops had secured fragile footholds in France. The German High Command had expected an invasion, but not here. For months, deception operations convinced Berlin that the main landing would strike the Pas-de-Calais. Even after reports confirmed the Normandy assault, Adolf Hitler hesitated to release armor reserves. Critical hours were lost. The 12th SS Panzer Division and Panzer Lehr Division moved only after Allied beachheads had stabilized. Yet the German defense did not collapse. Field Marshal Erwin Rommel had strengthened coastal fortifications and mined inland fields. German infantry divisions, though under strength, fought from hedgerows and villages with discipline. The bocage countryside, narrow lanes bordered by dense earthen banks, favored the defender. Every field became a fortress. Every orchard concealed machine guns. Through June and early July, the battle settled into grinding attrition. British and Canadian forces pushed toward Caen. The city changed hands block by block. American units fought for Saint-Lô in suffocating heat. Progress was measured in yards, not miles. Casualties mounted steadily on both sides. The German 7th Army, under General Friedrich Dahlmann and later General Paul Hauser, held firm but absorbed relentless pressure. Allied artillery superiority grew daily. Air supremacy was complete. Any German movement by daylight risked immediate attack from fighter bombers. Behind the front lines, the imbalance widened. American industry had already reached levels Germany could not match. New divisions arrived each week. Replacement vehicles and artillery flowed steadily from the beaches through newly constructed supply depots. Artificial mulberry harbors and captured ports ensured constant reinforcement. German forces in Normandy, by contrast, relied on stretched rail networks and fuel stocks already depleted by years of war. Allied bombing had crippled transport infrastructure across France. Panzer divisions often moved only at night. Fuel was rationed carefully. Ammunition stocks dwindled. By mid-July, Allied commanders recognized that a breakthrough was essential. General Omar Bradley, commanding U.S. 1st Army, studied the German defensive line west of Saint-Lô. It bulged outward, heavily defended but vulnerable to concentrated assault. The plan became Operation Cobra. On July 25, 1944, more than 1,500 American bombers struck a narrow sector of the German line. The bombardment was immense. High explosives flattening positions across several miles. Some bombs fell short, causing tragic American casualties. But the German defense in that sector was shattered. When U.S. infantry and armor advanced, resistance faltered. Panzer Lehr Division, once one of Germany's most elite formations, was devastated. Communications broke down. Units lost cohesion. American armored columns began moving rapidly through previously contested ground. The Bocage barrier had been breached. Within days, U.S. forces were advancing south and west, threatening to unhinge the entire German position in Normandy. General George S. Patton's newly activated Third Army moved with speed that German commanders struggled to comprehend. Roads filled not with defensive lines, but with retreating formations. The strategic situation shifted abruptly. Instead of containing the Allies near the beaches, German forces now face envelopment. Hitler, however, refused the obvious solution. Withdrawal to the Seine River might have preserved manpower and equipment, but orders from Berlin demanded counterattack. On August 7, German forces launched Operation Luttich, a desperate offensive near Mortain intended to cut off advancing American spearheads and restore the front. The attack achieved temporary gains, but quickly stalled under concentrated Allied air power and artillery. By mid-August, the German front in Normandy was no longer a line. It was a pocket forming, and as Allied forces advanced from multiple directions, the question was no longer whether the German army in Normandy could hold, but whether it could escape at all. By August 10, 1944, the German position in Normandy had become unstable. Operation Luttich had failed. American forces held firm near Mortain, and Allied air power had turned the German counterattack into a costly setback. Columns of destroyed panzers and transport vehicles marked the roads west of the battlefield. Whatever initiative the Germans had hoped to regain was gone. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge, now commander of Army Group B after Rommel's wounding in July, faced a deteriorating map. The 7th Army and elements of the 5th Panzer Army were still engaged across Normandy, but their flanks were exposed. American units under Bradley and Patton were pushing south and east with increasing momentum. On August 1st, Patton's Third Army had officially become operational. Within days, its armored divisions were racing through Brittany and swinging east toward the Loire River. Instead of reinforcing a static front, American forces were maneuvering at operational depth. Speed replaced attrition. To the north, British and Canadian forces under Field Marshal Bernard Montgomery maintained pressure around Caen. Canadian First Army, commanded by General Harry Crerar, began advancing southward toward Falaise. Their objective was not merely territorial. It was encirclement. The geographic reality of Normandy shaped the unfolding plan. The towns of Falaise, Argentan, Trun, and Chambois formed a rough quadrilateral. Between them lay rolling farmland cut by narrow roads and the Dives River Valley. If Allied forces advancing from the north and south could link up near Chambois, they would close a pocket around the bulk of German forces west of the Seine. The gap was narrow, but it remained open. German commanders understood the danger. Many urged immediate withdrawal eastward before the corridor closed. Von Kluge requested permission to pull back. His reports described deteriorating fuel stocks, mounting casualties, and increasing desertion among exhausted units. Hitler refused. Instead, he ordered continued counterattacks. The directive was explicit: hold positions and restore the front. The Fuhrer believed Allied advances were overextended and vulnerable. He viewed retreat as weakness, not necessity. This decision would prove decisive. By August 14th, Canadian forces launched Operation Tractable, advancing toward Falaise under heavy air and artillery support. Progress was deliberate but steady. German rear guards fought stubbornly, often composed of fragmented battalions lacking armor and adequate ammunition. Simultaneously, American 15 Corps advanced northward from Argentan. Armored divisions, including the 5th Armored and 79th Infantry Division, moved rapidly through weakened German lines. Reconnaissance units reported minimal organized resistance in some sectors, evidence that German command cohesion was faltering. Yet, coordination among Allied forces introduced complications. Bradley, cautious about overextension and potential friendly fire incidents with Canadian units advancing from the north, temporarily halted American movement near Argentan. This pause left a narrow corridor open, only a few miles wide, through which German forces began attempting escape. It was not an organized withdrawal. Columns jammed the roads. Infantry marched beside horse-drawn wagons. Panzer units, short on fuel, abandoned vehicles in ditches. Medical units struggled to evacuate wounded under constant air attack. Luftwaffe support was minimal. Allied aircraft dominated the skies. The corridor between Falaise and Argenton became a funnel. German forces moving eastward encountered relentless strafing and bombing. Fighter bombers attacked bridges and crossroads, forcing vehicles into open fields where they became easy targets. Artillery from Canadian and Polish positions added to the devastation. Still, tens of thousands pressed forward. Among them were veterans of campaigns in Poland, France, the Balkans, and the Eastern Front. Many had survived years of warfare. Now they were compressed into a shrinking pocket, uncertain whether the exit ahead would remain open long enough. On August 16th, Hitler finally authorized a withdrawal toward the Seine. The order came late. By then, Polish armored units under General Stanislaw Maxek had reached Mont Ormel, a commanding ridge overlooking the escape route near Chambois. From this height, artillery observers could see the valley below and the dense German traffic struggling eastward. The trap was nearly set. American forces approached from the south. Canadian and Polish forces pressed from the north. British units secured flanking positions. The once fluid German front had hardened into a narrowing ring. Inside it remained elements of more than 20 divisions. The corridor was shrinking by the hour, and within days it would close entirely. Angle 1, the German command crisis. By mid-August 1944, the German command structure in Normandy was strained beyond its limits. Field Marshal Gunther von Kluge understood the gravity of the situation. Reports arriving at Army Group B headquarters described fragmented divisions, collapsing supply lines, and Allied armor advancing with increasing speed. Communications were inconsistent. Radio units had been destroyed or forced to relocate repeatedly. Staff officers operated with incomplete information. Von Kluge requested permission to withdraw behind the Seine River. His assessment was pragmatic. Preservation of manpower could allow the formation of a new defensive line in northern France or Belgium. But Adolf Hitler viewed withdrawal as defeatism. Orders from Berlin emphasized counterattack, not retreat. The delay proved costly. German corps commanders on the ground often acted independently, pulling units back without formal authorization. Others held positions longer than tactically reasonable, awaiting directives that arrived too late. Coordination between the 7th Army and 5th Panzer Army deteriorated as Allied penetrations widened. On August 17th, von Kluge was relieved of command and replaced by Field Marshal Walter Model, a commander known for defensive skill and ruthless discipline. Model arrived to find the battlefield already disintegrating. His priority was no longer counterattack. It was extraction, but even Model faced the same constraints: limited fuel, broken infrastructure, and overwhelming Allied pressure. The German High Command's rigidity had transformed a difficult withdrawal into a race against encirclement. Leadership paralysis at the strategic level now translated into chaos at the tactical level. And inside the pocket, officers could no longer promise their men a coherent plan. Angle 2, logistical collapse. Modern mechanized warfare depended on fuel, ammunition, and mobility. In Normandy, Germany had lost control of all three. Allied bombing campaigns throughout the spring and summer of 1944 had devastated French rail lines and fuel depots. Bridges were destroyed faster than they could be repaired. Convoys attempting daylight movement were quickly spotted and attacked by Allied aircraft. Panzer divisions inside the forming Falaise Pocket often possessed tanks but lacked gasoline. Crews siphoned fuel from damaged vehicles. Some units destroyed their own equipment when it could no longer move. Artillery batteries rationed shells carefully, firing only when targets were confirmed. Medical services deteriorated sharply. Field hospitals were overrun or abandoned. Wounded soldiers were loaded onto overcrowded transport wagons or left behind in improvised aid stations. Morphine supplies ran low. Surgical facilities lacked electricity or sterile equipment. Food distribution faltered as well. Supply columns became entangled in the same traffic bottlenecks as combat units. Horses, still essential to German logistics, were killed in air attacks or collapsed from exhaustion. The road network between Falaise and the Seine became a narrow artery carrying the remains of an army. When Allied fighter bombers struck, the artery clogged with wreckage. Each destroyed vehicle created another obstacle. Traffic slowed to a crawl. Logistics no longer supported combat operations. It merely attempted to enable survival. By August 18th, entire formations moved on foot, abandoning heavy weapons along the roadside. German strength on paper bore little resemblance to operational reality. Divisions counted thousands of men, but possessed only fragments of combat capability. Without fuel, mobility vanished. Without ammunition, resistance weakened. Without medical support, morale declined. The material foundations of German power in Normandy were collapsing, and with them, the possibility of organized withdrawal. Angle 3. Allied air superiority. Above the pocket, the sky belonged entirely to the Allies. By August 1944, the Luftwaffe in Western Europe had been severely depleted. Fuel shortages limited training. Experienced pilots had been lost over years of attrition. Aircraft production could not compensate for operational losses. In contrast, Allied air forces operated in strength. The Royal Air Force and the United States Army Air Forces maintained continuous patrols over Normandy. Fighter bombers such as the Hawker Typhoon and the P-47 Thunderbolt roamed roads and railways, armed with rockets and bombs specifically suited to attacking vehicles. Reconnaissance aircraft identified traffic concentrations within the narrowing corridor. Once detected, strikes followed quickly. Pilots described columns stretching for miles, trucks, tanks, horse-drawn wagons. Infantry intermingled in confusion. Attacks were methodical. Aircraft would descend in sequence, releasing rockets into dense clusters of vehicles. Secondary explosions ignited fuel stores and ammunition trucks. Survivors scattered into adjacent fields, only to face artillery fire directed from elevated Allied positions. The psychological impact was profound. German troops understood that daylight movement invited destruction. Many units attempted night marches, but congestion made rapid progress impossible. Fires from earlier strikes illuminated the landscape, exposing silhouettes against the horizon. Air superiority did more than destroy equipment. It disrupted timing. Withdrawal depended on coordination. Air attacks shattered schedules and communication links. Orders could not reach units trapped in traffic. Commanders lost visibility of their formations. The pocket did not close solely because of ground maneuver. It closed because German movement slowed under constant aerial pressure. By the time Allied ground forces approached Chambois, much of the German army inside the pocket had already been broken by forces descending from above, and the narrowing corridor now funneled tens of thousands into a single desperate attempt to escape. Angle 4. The human experience inside the pocket. Inside the narrowing ring, the experience of the ordinary German soldier shifted from disciplined withdrawal to survival. Units that had entered Normandy in June with organized battalions were now fragments. Companies merged. Platoons operated without officers. Many soldiers had not slept properly in days. Continuous artillery fire and air attack erased any sense of stability. The landscape offered little protection. Normandy's hedgerows, once defensive assets, became obstacles during retreat. Narrow lanes forced vehicles into single-file columns. When one truck burned, the road closed. Infantry moved through fields thick with crops, carrying what equipment they could salvage. Heavy weapons were abandoned in ditches. Wounded men accumulated rapidly. Field medics improvised with limited supplies. Some were evacuated, many were not. Horses lay dead beside artillery caissons, adding to the obstruction and the stench that hung over the valley. Morale fractured unevenly. Veterans of the Eastern Front recognized the signs of encirclement. They understood what it meant when supply failed and communication faltered. Some maintained discipline, forming rear guards to delay Allied advances. Others discarded insignia and attempted escape in small groups. Rumors spread faster than orders. Reports of Polish armor blocking high ground. American tanks advancing from the south. British artillery ranging the exit routes. Each hour narrowed the window of hope. For many soldiers, the objective was no longer victory. It was crossing the Dives River alive. As the corridor tightened, survival depended less on command direction and more on individual decision. And that shift marked the quiet disintegration of an army that had once maneuvered across continents. Angle 5. The Polish stand at Mont Ormel. High above the valley stood Mont Ormel, a ridge commanding the final escape route near Chambois. On August 19th, 1944, elements of the Polish 1st Armored Division under General Stanislaw Maczek secured the height. From this position, artillery observers could see the congested German columns below. The ridge became known later as Hill 262. Its capture transformed geography into leverage. Polish units, though themselves limited in number and ammunition, established defensive positions overlooking the corridor. From there, they directed fire onto German attempts to break through. Tanks, anti-tank guns, and infantry interlocked in a defensive arc. German forces recognized the threat immediately. Repeated counterattacks were launched against the Polish positions, encircled themselves on the ridge. Polish units endured heavy shelling and close combat. Ammunition ran low. Casualties mounted. Resupply proved difficult under constant pressure, yet the position held. Control of Mont Ormel denied German columns a secure passage eastward. Every movement below was exposed to observation and artillery correction. What had been a narrow exit became a killing ground. The stand on Mont Ormel did not alone seal the pocket, but it fixed the final hinge in place. It ensured that the corridor could not widen again. Below the ridge, the density of trapped forces increased. Angle 6, the tactical closing of the gap. While German units struggled to escape and Polish forces held the high ground, American and Canadian formations advanced steadily toward one another. From the south, elements of U.S. 15 Corps pushed north from Argenton. Armored reconnaissance units probed cautiously, aware of the risk of friendly fire as Allied lines converged. Coordination between commands required precision. Maps were updated continuously. Artillery fire zones were adjusted carefully. From the north, Canadian units advanced through Trun and toward Chambois under difficult conditions. Resistance was fragmented but persistent. German rear guards fought delaying actions, often sacrificing themselves to buy minutes for withdrawing columns. The distance between the Allied pincers shrank from miles to yards. On August 19th, patrols from the Polish 1st Armored Division linked with elements of the U.S. 90th Infantry Division near Chambois. The physical link was modest, small groups meeting along a contested road, but its operational significance was immense. The pocket was effectively closed. Some German units continued to slip through undercover darkness. Thousands escaped before the final seal tightened completely, but organized withdrawal ceased. Movement turned chaotic. Within the encirclement remained tens of thousands of German troops, compressed into a shrinking area saturated by artillery and air attack. The battle had shifted from maneuver to collapse, and in the valley below Mont Ormel, the decisive moment was approaching. August 18th to 19th, 1944, the corridor of death. By the evening of August 18th, the escape route east of Falaise had narrowed to only a few kilometers. German columns converged toward the Chambois. Vimotiers rode in continuous waves. What had begun as a structured withdrawal was now a compressed mass of infantry, artillery, armored vehicles, and supply wagons packed tightly along exposed routes. Allied artillery observers watched from elevated ground. When fire missions were called in, shells landed among stalled vehicles and clustered troops. Explosions ignited fuel trucks. Secondary detonations rippled down the road. The congestion intensified with every strike. Above, fighter bombers attacked methodically. Royal Air Force Typhoons and USP-47 Thunderbolts swept low over the valley, firing rockets into armored vehicles trapped in traffic. Pilots later described the roads as blackened lines of wreckage stretching for miles. Movement slowed to walking pace. Smoke columns rose in layers. German commanders attempted to organize breakout corridors. Assault groups were formed to punch through Allied positions near Chambois and Mont Ormel. Tanks led the way when fuel allowed. Infantry followed on foot, weaving between burning vehicles. Some breakthroughs succeeded temporarily. During the night of August 18th to 19th, under cover of darkness and smoke, groups of German soldiers slipped through weak points between Allied units. The confusion of converging forces left gaps, small, shifting spaces where escape remained possible. But daylight returned the advantage to the Allies. Polish forces on Mont Ormel endured heavy counterattacks as German units tried to reopen the corridor. Close-range fighting erupted along the slopes. Tanks engaged at short distances. Ammunition stocks dwindled on both sides. Below the ridge, the valley became impassable. Destroyed vehicles blocked roads entirely. Horses lay tangled in harnesses. Abandoned artillery pieces stood at angles along ditches. German engineers attempted to clear paths, but renewed airstrikes halted progress repeatedly. The Dives river crossings became choke points. Bridges were shelled. Makeshift crossings collapsed under weight. Soldiers waded through shallow water, carrying rifles overhead. Many left heavy equipment behind to move faster. The once mechanized strength of the German army reduced itself to foot columns. Command cohesion evaporated. Orders issued at corps headquarters rarely reached frontline units. Radio batteries failed. Messengers were delayed or killed en route. Local commanders acted independently, prioritizing immediate escape over coordinated maneuver. By midday on August 19th, Allied ground forces tightened their grip further. American units advanced northward cautiously, aware of the dense concentration of German troops ahead. Canadian and Polish formations consolidated positions to prevent widening of the corridor. The pocket was not yet completely sealed, but the organized withdrawal of an army had devolved into fragmented survival attempts. German formations that had once maneuvered across France in 1940 now struggled to move a few hundred meters under fire. The decisive break was imminent, and within hours, the final routes would close entirely. By the night of August 19 to 20, 1944, the Falaise Pocket had effectively ceased to function as a maneuver space. It had become a containment zone. The last viable escape routes east of Chambois were under direct observation and fire from Allied positions. Polish forces on Mont Ormel, reinforced despite heavy losses, maintained control of the heights. Canadian units tightened their hold around Trun and Falaise. American forces secured southern approaches and blocked organized breakout attempts. Inside the pocket, German command structure disintegrated. Field Marshal Walter Model issued urgent orders to withdraw remnants toward the Seine, but there was no longer a coherent force to direct. Divisions existed only as names on paper. Regimental staffs had been scattered. Vehicles lacked fuel. Artillery lacked ammunition. Infantry lacked clear objectives beyond survival. Throughout August 20th and 21st, isolated German groups attempted localized assaults to reopen corridors. Some fought with discipline, using remaining armor to shield infantry movements. Others advanced in improvised waves, hoping numbers alone could break Allied lines. These efforts failed. Allied artillery, now firing with precision from multiple directions, blanketed likely routes of advance. Air support continued during daylight hours. Each German attempt to mass forces for a breakout created a visible target. The valley floor told the story. Estimates after the battle recorded thousands of destroyed vehicles. Tanks, half-tracks, trucks, artillery pieces, abandoned or shattered along a corridor later described by Allied observers as a scene of unprecedented devastation in Western Europe. Carcasses of horses lay among twisted steel. Fields were cratered and blackened. The physical destruction mirrored psychological collapse. As ammunition ran out and units lost contact with higher headquarters, many German officers made pragmatic decisions. Small groups began surrendering to nearby Allied units. White flags appeared sporadically along hedgerows and road junctions. Soldiers emerged from ditches and tree lines with hands raised. Not all surrendered immediately. Pockets of resistance continued fighting, especially among SS formations determined to escape capture. But by August 21st, organized resistance within the encirclement had largely ended. The numbers were staggering. Approximately 40,000 to 50,000 German troops managed to escape eastward before the pocket fully closed, though many did so without heavy equipment. Around 10,000 to 15,000 were killed in the fighting and bombardment. An estimated 40,000 to 50,000 were captured during and immediately after collapse. And as mopping up operations continued, total prisoners associated with the Falaise encirclement rose toward 90,000. The 7th Army had effectively ceased to exist as a cohesive force. The 5th Panzer Army was reduced to fragments. The German army in Normandy, once positioned to repel invasion, had been shattered in less than 3 months. For Allied commanders, the significance was immediate. The road to the Seine lay open. Paris stood within reach. German forces west of the river were broken beyond rapid repair. For the soldiers inside the pocket, the war changed in an instant. Some began the long march into captivity. Others crossed the Seine exhausted, without equipment, forming the core of new defensive lines in Belgium and along the German frontier. Many left behind comrades, weapons, and the illusion that Normandy could be stabilized. The encirclement at Falaise was not merely a tactical defeat. It was the irreversible collapse of German operational control in France. And from that collapse flowed consequences that would reshape the final year of the war in Western Europe. When Allied troops moved fully into the former pocket after August 21st, 1944, they encountered a battlefield unlike any previously seen in the campaign. The valley between Falaise, Trun, and Chambois was littered with wreckage. Burned tanks stood at angles in wheat fields. Trucks had fused into twisted frames. Artillery pieces lay abandoned beside crates of unused shells. Dead horses and shattered wagons marked the collapse of Germany's hybrid logistics system, part mechanized, part dependent on animal transport. The scale of material loss was immense. Estimates recorded more than 10,000 destroyed or abandoned vehicles of all types. Hundreds of tanks and assault guns were lost. Artillery pieces, anti-tank guns, and heavy equipment that could not be towed east were left behind. The German army in the west had lost not only manpower, but the machinery required to wage modern war. Prisoners were gathered in large numbers. Columns of captured German soldiers moved under guard toward temporary holding areas. Many appeared exhausted, uniforms torn, faces blackened by smoke and dust. Officers were separated for interrogation. Intelligence officers worked quickly to assess the damage inflicted on German order of battle. The numbers told a stark story. Roughly 90,000 German troops were removed from effective combat strength through death, capture, or dispersal during the Falaise encirclement. While some formations reassembled east of the Seine, they did so without heavy weapons and with depleted morale. Divisions that had once fielded coordinated battle groups now consisted of scattered remnants. Strategically, the collapse accelerated Allied momentum. With organized resistance west of the Seine shattered, German forces could not mount a sustained offensive line in northern France. Retreat became general rather than selective. Bridges over the Seine were targeted by Allied aircraft to prevent orderly withdrawal. On August 25, 1944, Paris was liberated by Allied forces and elements of the French resistance. The speed of advance surprised even some Allied planners. Supply lines strained to keep pace with armored spearheads pushing toward the Belgian border. For Germany, the defeat at Falaise marked the loss of France as a viable theater of maneuver. The Western Front no longer consisted of fortified positions designed to repel invasion. It became a series of hurried defensive efforts aimed at slowing an advancing enemy with overwhelming material superiority. Field Marshal Model attempted to reorganize surviving units along the Seine and later near the German frontier, but the time required to rebuild cohesive formations could not be recovered. The initiative had shifted decisively. The destruction at Falaise was not merely physical, it was structural. Germany's capacity to conduct coordinated, large-scale operations in the West had been crippled. The balance of forces, already unfavorable, now tilted dramatically. And as Allied columns crossed rivers and approached new frontiers, the psychological consequences of Falaise began to take hold within the German command itself. The Falaise Pocket left more than physical destruction. It shattered the confidence of the German command. Field Marshal Model and surviving corps commanders faced a grim reality. Units that had survived the encirclement were disorganized and demoralized. Soldiers, stripped of equipment and exhausted from continuous retreat, lacked cohesion. Even the most experienced officers acknowledged that rebuilding operational capacity in northern France or Belgium would require months the German military could not afford. The psychological impact extended beyond the army. Hitler, already frustrated by repeated setbacks, intensified his micromanagement. Orders from Berlin increasingly emphasized rigid defense and counterattack, regardless of practical feasibility. Commanders who had witnessed the collapse of Falaise understood that central directives no longer aligned with battlefield realities. Morale among senior leaders declined alongside that of the rank and file. Meanwhile, Allied forces capitalized on the momentum. The destruction of German forces in Normandy allowed rapid exploitation of the Seine corridor. Units of the U.S. Third Army, now unopposed in significant sectors, advanced eastward at unprecedented speed. Armored divisions pushed toward Belgium, establishing bridgeheads and securing critical crossings along the Meuse and Moselle rivers. Supply depots and captured towns facilitated the logistical demands of a rapidly moving army. The liberation of Paris on August 25, 1944, symbolized the operational consequences of the Falaise collapse. German forces were incapable of mounting effective resistance in the region, leaving occupied France open to Allied control. German defensive strategy shifted from calculated engagements to reactive withdrawals. The loss of Falaise underscored the inability of the Wehrmacht to coordinate large-scale operations when encircled, highlighting the growing disparity between Allied and German operational capabilities. Casualty reports painted a stark picture. Approximately 10,000 German soldiers had been killed, while 40,000 to 50,000 were captured. The remainder who escaped eastward were largely stripped of heavy equipment, their divisions rendered ineffective. Allied losses, though significant, were comparatively light. Air power had allowed attrition from above, reducing the need for direct ground engagement. Falaise also provided a lesson in combined arms coordination. Allied success relied not only on numerical superiority, but on the integration of air, artillery, armor, and infantry. The Polish stand on Mont Ormel, combined with American and Canadian advances, demonstrated the power of coordinated, multinational operations against a fractured enemy. The collapse of the German army in Normandy would reverberate for the rest of the war in Western Europe. Without effective formations west of the Seine, Germany's ability to slow the Allied advance was diminished. Strategic reserves were depleted. The momentum gained in August 1944 allowed the Allies to enter Belgium, liberate key industrial regions, and ultimately prepare for the invasion of Germany itself. The Falaise Pocket was a turning point not merely in numbers or territory, but in the operational and psychological dynamics of the Western Front. German forces had been contained, shattered, and forced into permanent strategic disadvantage. The stage was set for the final campaigns in France, Belgium, and the Rhineland. The Falaise Pocket stands as a stark testament to the interplay of strategy, speed, and human endurance in modern warfare. What unfolded in those few days of August 1944 was more than a military victory. It was a culmination of months of planning, coordination, and relentless pressure applied across multiple domains. From the air, the valley resembled a theater of inevitability. Allied aircraft had turned movement itself into a weapon, and artillery from elevated positions transformed roads into lethal corridors. On the ground, the Polish stand atop Mont Ormel demonstrated that even small, resolute formations could shape the outcome of entire operations. Meanwhile, the fractured German command, constrained by rigid orders and collapsing logistics, became a mirror reflecting the dangers of inflexibility and overstretched forces. The human cost was immense. Tens of thousands of soldiers faced death, capture, or the trauma of witnessing their armies collapse. The stories of survival amid chaos illustrate both the endurance and vulnerability of combatants when strategy outpaces individual capacity. Yet these narratives also underscore the broader truth. Modern warfare is as much about organization, coordination, and adaptability as it is about courage or equipment. Strategically, Falaise irreversibly shifted the Western Front. German forces west of the Seine were no longer capable of coordinated defense. Allied momentum accelerated. Supply lines flowed unimpeded, and the liberation of France moved from possibility to inevitability. The battle highlighted the decisive effect of combined arms operations, operational mobility, and air superiority, lessons that remain central to military thought even today. In the end, the Falaise Pocket serves as both a historical lesson and a human story. It reminds us that victory in war is rarely the product of a single action, but of sustained pressure, coordination, and the relentless application of strategy against an opponent stretched to its limits. The collapse of nearly 90,000 German troops in those fields of Normandy did more than alter maps. It reshaped the course of a continent, leaving a legacy in tactics, leadership, and the enduring costs of conflict. And from this reflection, the narrative of the Falaise Pocket flows naturally into the subsequent campaigns that would ultimately bring the Allies to Germany's doorstep. where the lessons of encirclement, mobility, and operational coordination would again define the outcome of history.